Hey y'all, it's Mr. Hill again. So in this video, we're going to be talking not so much about the president, but the Veep. And what does that even mean? And what are the qualifications to be the vice president? What do they actually do? Spoiler on that last one, not much. But we'll get into that as we go through these slides together. All right, so in this video, we're talking about presidential succession and the vice president. Objectives: explain how the Constitution provides for presidential succession, understand the constitutional provisions relating to presidential disability, and describe the role of the Veep. Few terms: presidential succession, Succession Act of 1947, balancing the ticket, etc. So when it comes to presidential succession, the vice president has succeeded the president 9 times in U.S. history, beginning with John Tyler replacing William Henry Harrison in 1841. So a little background, a little history. So William Henry Harrison ran for president in 1840, presidential election year, and he won. And come March of 1841, he was giving his inaugural address, his inaugural speech. And it was one of the longest speeches in U.S. presidential history. He spoke for over 2 hours on an abnormally cold, damp, windy March morning. So cold, windy, damp. He got sick. And then he got pneumonia. And then he died 30 days into his presidency. He is the shortest tenured president that we've ever had. We have never had a president up and die on us before. And we literally didn't have a clue how to proceed. Since he had only been in office for a month, some folks said, well, let's just have another presidential election. No, that's going to cost too much money. Okay, well, maybe we should just let the runner-up be the president. No, you can't let those evil whatever Whigs or something. Actually, that would have been the Democrats. Harrison was a Whig. Regardless, you can't let the bad guys come in and just, have this White House. We didn't know what to do. So John Tyler, Harrison's vice president, basically just said, I'll be president. And we said, cool, great, good luck, Johnny. So at first, the vice president technically assumed only the powers and duties of the presidency. However, over time, it became more of a permanent role and a title role as well. John Tyler, for example, insisted that he be called President Tyler, and that's how we refer to him now. Under the 25th Amendment, which was adopted in 1967, the vice president now formally assumes the office of president in addition to all the responsibilities and, job title and all that kind of thing. So as far as the order of succession, this is created by Congress. Under the 25th Amendment, the vice president assumes the presidency in the event of presidential death, resignation, incapacity. But what if both the president and the Veep go down at the same time? That's why we have this big list of succession. Congress fixed this list of succession after the vice president with the Presidential Succession Act of 1947. So it goes president, vice president, speaker of the House, president pro tem of the Senate, and then you have all your cabinet positions in the order that they were created. So the most recent cabinet position, the Office of Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, was created in 2003. So that's your low man on the totem pole. Now, interestingly, none of these people, including the president, are ever going to be in the exact same place at the exact same time, because any weird thing could happen and then we wouldn't have a leader. A meteor strike could hit, the roof could collapse, the ground could open up and swallow everybody. So one of these people in the list will, I don't know if they draw straws or pick a number or what, but somebody has to be the designated survivor, which they've even had a whole TV show about starring Kiefer Sutherland. Anyway, that person will go and watch like State of the Unions or other important speeches or meetings at some distance away just as an in case. Of course, the odds of all 18, 19, counting the president, people going down at the same time are astronomically slim. But you can never be too careful. So as far as presidential disability, for a long time, there were no provisions for deciding if a president was too disabled to continue in office. And we've had, quite a number of presidents having, a variety of ailments, issues, and things. So, for example, Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke in 1919 and was too sick to meet with his cabinet for 7 months. That's problematic when you're the leader of the free world. President Eisenhower had 3 serious but temporary illnesses while in office. In 1981, President Reagan was shot in the abdomen in an assassination attempt. And then he had to go to the hospital where he told the doctors, I hope you're all Republicans, because he was a Republican. He's kind of funny. Anyway, so how do you tell if presidents are too infirm to continue working? Well, according to the 25th Amendment, the vice president becomes the acting president if, now let me explain, acting president means it's temporary. They're only acting as president until the president is well enough to resume responsibilities and duties of office. So when does this actually happen? If the president themselves informs Congress in writing that they can't carry out the powers and duties of office. So for instance, if a president is about to have, some type of minor surgical procedure where they would be put under general anesthesia and be, unconscious for, 8 hours or something. The president, knowing this in advance, could write to Congress and say, hey, gang, I'm about to have surgery and I'm going to be out of it for a few hours. So while I'm out, the vice president is in charge. Or the vice president and a majority of the members of the cabinet inform Congress in writing that the president is so incapacitated. So this would be an all of a sudden thing, like, oh my gosh, the president's in a coma. Obviously, you're not going to wake up from your coma, sign, hey, I'm out and I'm going to have a coma now, and the vice president's going to be in charge. That's probably all of a sudden thing. So if that's the situation, the VP and the majority of the cabinet will inform Congress that they're in charge until the president gets better. The president may resume the power and duties of the office by informing Congress in writing that no inability exists. The vice president and the majority of the members of the cabinet may challenge the president on that issue. Not that they ever would, but who knows? It's important that there be some fail-safes in there, just in case the president is, got a brainworm or something, or has been, taken over by aliens and maybe not in their right mind. It'd be important for the VP and the majority of the cabinet to challenge the president that they're actually able to perform the duties of office. So what are the formal responsibilities and duties of the vice president? According to the Constitution, the vice president has 2 formal duties: to preside over the Senate and to help decide if the president is disabled under the 25th Amendment. So otherwise, the vice president's just got to be ready. That's the whole job. Now, obviously, that requires a lot of work. The vice president is going to be privy to a lot of the same reports and intelligence briefings that the president is. That way, there's not very much gap between presidents if the president happens to die or quit or whatever. So you want to have as seamless a transition as possible, especially in like a crisis scenario where, say, maybe the president was assassinated or something. You would want the vice president to have as much of the relevant information as possible to step immediately into the president's role and continue operating the country as otherwise normal. Historically, the office of vice president has had low status. Usually the vice presidential candidate is chosen to balance the ticket. Now, that can mean all kinds of things. One of my favorite examples of this is the 2008 election. Great balancing of tickets for both parties in this case. So we'll start with the Republicans. You had Senator John McCain of Arizona winning the GOP nomination for president, and Sarah Palin, the governor of Alaska, was chosen as his vice president. So he was super old. He was 72 in 2008. So he's old. He's been in Washington a long time. And basically, they chose Sarah Palin because she was much younger. She was female. And that kind of brought some balance to that ticket. Meanwhile, for the Democrats, you had Barack Obama, senator from Illinois, and he had not been in Congress that long. In fact, he was in his first term as a senator for Illinois when he won the nomination for president in 2008. So, relative inexperience, African American. So they chose for him Joe Biden, who had been in the Senate a long time for the state of Delaware. So obviously there's balance in that ticket. Old and young, black and white on the Republican side, and you have experience and inexperience, young and old again, male, female. It can be any kind of thing. A lot of times presidents will have a say in choosing their vice president based on geography and which states are going to be important in the upcoming election. So I don't know. Let's say that Mississippi is a swing state. Mississippi is not a swing state, but let's pretend. So if Mississippi is a swing state and could be the tipping point between winning and losing an election, those presidential candidates might consider picking like the governor of Mississippi or a senator from Mississippi in order to get Mississippi's votes to kind of help ensure their win. That doesn't put a ton of emphasis on presidential qualities possessed by a vice presidential candidate. Sometimes they don't put much, thought into, is this person able to actually do the job? For instance, we'll go again back to 2008. For McCain, he had Sarah Palin as a running mate, and quite frankly, that probably cost him the election, because if he died in office, which he was old in 2008, could have happened, you'd have Sarah Palin stepping into the presidency, and many people were convinced that she wasn't capable of leading the United States as a whole. Alaska, sure, fine, but Alaska ain't the entire country, and for a lot of folks, that was just too much inexperience to overcome. As far as the vice presidency today, recent vice presidents have had much more political experience and influence. So as you can see here in this picture, you've got Joe Biden, who is the vice president for Barack Obama, who is now the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party for this year's 2020 presidential election. He'd had a ton of experience even before becoming Barack Obama's vice president, tons of foreign policy experience in particular. If you go back to the previous administration, George W. Bush, his vice president was Dick Cheney, who is one of the most influential vice presidents in history. Tons of experience for the relatively inexperienced George W. Bush, at least at the time. No vice president has ever been given as much power as the president, in part because the president cannot actually remove the vice president. The vice president technically doesn't work for the president. The vice president is an elected position just like the president is. In fact, both of those elections occur simultaneously when we go to the polls and vote in November. But it's an elected position. And as an elected position, the president can't just fire the vice president. The vice president would have to be impeached and removed from the vice presidency. They have to quit. They might, die, obviously, in office. Whatever the case, the president can't just fire them. The vice presidency has been left vacant 9 times by succession, 7 times by death, and twice by resignation. Under the 25th Amendment, the president can fill a vice presidential vacancy by nominating a vice president, who must then be confirmed by both houses of Congress. So in this case, you're talking about, for example, Gerald Ford. In 1973, Ford became the first vice president appointed in this fashion. Fun fact about Jerry Ford: he is the only vice president and president to have never been elected to either position. So in 1973, Richard Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, resigned in disgrace amid a political and criminal scandal. So Nixon appointed Ford and he was confirmed. Then Nixon resigned in a presidential and political criminal scandal, and Ford ascended to the presidency in 1974, but was not elected. And that's it for section 2. In the next video, we'll talk about the framers' plan originally for how to choose a president.